Hey programmers, what is going on? I'm the Savage Coder. Welcome to episode 21. In this episode, we're going to continue with JWT authentication and head down that path so we can get everyone signed in, signed up, authenticated, and lock down our API and our application with the proper security. In the last episode, we went through the whole sign-up process where a user can sign up. We save that data in the database. So in this episode, we're going to allow users to log in. We're going to capture the login data, and we're going to pass that through to the API. We'll continue on with the tokens and that whole security part once we're able to sign up users and also log them in. So without further delay, let's get to it. Okay, quick note. I noticed that I forgot to push up the API code for the last episode to the GitHub. That is done now. So if you look for the episode 20 tag there, or if this is the newest episode, then you can just get latest, from the head of Git. Also, as a quick recap, the last two episodes, we created a form, collected data for user signup. We sent it to the API, stored it to the database. So we're able to create users. So in this episode, let's do the same thing to log in a user, where we'll create a login that collects your email and password, and we'll send that to the API, and we will return a JWT token if the login is valid. So with that in mind, when we get to the part where we have to encrypt the password, just like we did in the sign up, I'm going to move that sign up encryption into the backend API so that one project is responsible for all of the encrypt decrypt functionality, because keeping it in the front end and decrypting it in the back end just doesn't feel right. I mean, it works, but why put encryption or decryption things in the website side of things? So I thought about that a little more, and we're going to move that. So let's get to it. So if we pull up our UI project, what we need to do is create a form. So I'm going to run my API just so that when we run the UI project, we don't get errors that the API is down. And then in the UI, I'm going to go under views and user management, and this is where the login page is going to live. It's kind of the default thing that user management will do. The most common thing is that people are going to log in. So I'm going to right click under views, user management, and I'm going to add a new view, and we'll just choose a razor view, and we're going to call it index. And the reason we're calling it index is the default view that loads. And like I just said, the default thing that user management's going to probably do is log users in. All right, cool. So actually, our user management repository will load this view already. All it would say is index in bold. But if we looked at our controller for user management, at the top, we have this action that is called index that just returns view. And if you don't put the name of the view inside these parens, then it just looks for one called index that's under user management. So by convention, views user management index will load when you just return view. So I'm going to copy for now the sign up form because it's kind of close to what we want. So I'm just going to Control A and copy, and then go into my index and Control A and paste. I'm going to run this and see if we can get to our page. So in order to get to that, we'll have to put /user management at the URL. And here is our index page, which currently says sign up. So let's make that more like a login page. So one thing that is different between sign up and login is I don't need all these other fields like username and first name and last name. I don't need that to log in. So I'm going to go into my view models folder. I have to stop this. And I'll go into my view models folder, and I'm just going to create a view model that has the two things in it that I need to capture. So we'll make a class and we'll call it login view model. And its job is just going to be to collect the email. We'll make an auto property out of that. And then another one for password. And then I'm going to control RG. Save. I hit Control D on the end here, by the way, to duplicate the line so that I could just rename it password. So now we've got our Noble Cause Savage Cell UI view models. I'm going to copy that namespace, and the name of our class is login view model. So if I go back to my index page, I can change at the very top the name of my, or the data type of my model, which is going to be that namespace, but not sign up view model. We made a login view model. So that'll cause some errors because we don't have all of these properties anymore, nor do we need them. So let's change the HTML here from sign up. We'll call this login. And instead of please fill in this form to create an account, we'll just say, enter your email and password to log in. And I don't need this form group at all because that's just collecting first name, last name. So let's get rid of that one. I don't need username. We're going to log in with email. So let's get rid of that one. We do need email and password. Let's get rid of postal code. And we need our submit button here, but we don't want it to say sign up. We want it to say login. This link with already have an account doesn't really make sense if you're already on the sign-in page. So we really could have two things here, like a forgot password, or instead of already have an account, we could ask need an account. And then we can say sign up here. And we can add that functionality later. So let's run this. Go back to user management. And that looks pretty good, actually. Now we've got our UI for people to log in with. We just need to capture that data. And we're kind of already doing that because this HTML helper is binding the email to our view model. And so what we really need to do is when you click this button to submit, we need to grab all that data and do something with it, which is send it to the API to log in. So right now, our begin form HTML helper is calling the user management controller and the method sign up post. Well, I don't want to sign up. I want to log in. So I'm going to have to create a new action, and I'll call it login. And since it's a post, right, form method post over here, I'm going to be posting to user management with login post. So I need to create this login post in the user management controller. So let's stop that and do that. So if I go into the controller, I actually have what I need similarly here where you sign up. I just need to call it login. So let's just copy this and we'll modify what we need. So first thing is the name will be login post. It's going to accept a login view model, not a sign up view model. We can still call it view model, so we're good there. I'm going to get rid of all these comments. And we actually don't need this task completed. So I'm going to get rid of that on both of these. So a couple things I'm seeing at once. One, we have to fix these errors because they don't exist on our view model. But I'm also noticing that I chose not the greatest name here. I think because this is an async method, we really should have named this sign up post async. So I'll go back and do that after. But for now, let's call this login post async. So at least we start this one right. And I'm going to go back to my index page and I'm going to change the HTML begin form in there so that it calls the correct action. Cool. And now the only two things that are in our view model are email and password, which kind of are these two. So if I just delete this line and delete this line, that's more like what we need. And we're going to get back a token here. So I'm just going to say var token here, even though we don't have a token defined yet. We'll probably start off as a string, and then once we get our JWT token working, we'll replace that string with the actual token, and we'll figure out where we want to store that. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to create in our service layer, not a sign up, but a login async. And because this line looks right now, we don't have a login async method, but the rest of this looks perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the light bulb here and generate the method in the interface. So it's not going to know the return type because I just used var there. But I'm going to now go into the interface by control clicking. And for now, let's just return a task of string, and we'll fake that, and we'll come back and we'll change this out for our token type once we know what it is. This looks good now. What we need to do is implement this interface in our service. So if we go to the top and implement interface, we now have our public. Let's mark that async. And this guy is going to end up calling the repository layer. Again, we're going to move this encryption out, but for now, let's just stick with this. And we'll call the user management repository dot, and we'll also call it login async. And we will pass the email and the password. And this is the clear text password that the user is supplying. And this is going to be async, so we'll need to await that. And we're going to return a token, so we'll just return the result of that. And this doesn't exist, so I will light bulb it and generate that method. And let's go into the interface. And so it already got this one right. I'm going to RG this one. And then we can go into our repository and implement that interface change as well. So what we've really done here is we added a login async method to every layer, to the service and to the repo. And we're kind of going to do the same thing we did here, inside here, but this is not a new user sign up. Let's go into our model and add a class, and we'll call this one user login. User login. And it's going to just have the data that we have now, which is an email and a password. Oops. Control RG. And for our login, we will make a new user login. And I will control RR user login just to rename that symbol, which renames that one and this one for me. And I only need to copy over this and the password. So I'm taking these two values that we're passing in, and I'm assigning them to the user login property email and password. So essentially just copying our view model values into an API model. We're going to have to call an endpoint here, and we're not going to call users. I could call, we already have a user post, which is an insert. Typically, your token gets are posts as well in OAuth. We're not really following true OAuth here. We're just going to do some custom JWT tokens. So I'm going to make the endpoint API/token, just so that we know that this is a, pass me a user login and I will return a token. We need to make this method async. And so one thing that we need to do is when we do a post, if we're getting a response back, posts generally, they can put data in their response bodies, but we have to ask Floral for that data. We have to add on a receive JSON. For now, let's just do string. And then let's see if that gives me, it does. Just so we can inspect it, I'm going to put it in a variable, and then we'll get rid of that variable afterwards and just put a return here instead. Okay, so I think this looks good. We can call out with our data and get our token back. And so let's go ahead and make that other change that I talked about in the service layer, where I don't want this encryption to happen here. So we'll have to put the system web helpers in our API. So let's go to the API. And do we already have our system.web.helpers here? We do not. So I'm going to manage NuGet packages. Go to browse. System.web.helpers.crypto. Install. I'm going to have to revisit this. We're going to use it for now, but we may have to come back because it looks like system.web.helpers.crypto is using the .NET framework, not .NET 5, which would be a problem for us. So let's go with it for now, and I'll research that offline, and we'll make a change if we need to. Let's look at the flow here and see where we're at. So what we were doing was we were encrypting a password. I'm going to cut that line out we're in the UI code now, and I'm just going to pass password. And so that passes password to the repository, and then the repository, let's rename this control RR. It's no longer encrypted, so we'll name the variable password. And then it calls over to the user's API. So the API in the user controller is going to get this post, and it's going to call the service. And I think here in the service is where we want to change that value. So let's just say user.password is equal to, I'm going to paste that line we cut, and user.password, password. And let's bring in the namespace for crypto. Okay, so now when we call the service, we're saying, hey, grab the password that was passed into me and overwrite the password property you just read here with the encrypted version, so that when we call the repo can just store it. So still a service layer action, but it's going to happen on the server in the API. And so we shouldn't need any other changes there. So what we do need to do is we need to handle the call to log in. And so we're going to add another post, and this one is going to be our token endpoint. And so I need a special route for this, because we wanted it to be /API/token. And it's going to take in a user login. We can call that login. And we need to create this. So in our model API, we need to add a class called user login. And this is the same as the user login in our UI project. So I'm just going to copy that over and paste it into the API project and Control RG. And so now we have a post to token, API token that takes in a login. And instead of insert user async, we're gonna call login user async. And we're gonna pass the login. This will not return no content. This is gonna return an OK. And in here we'll have the results of the token. So just so we can inspect it, I'm just going to create a variable here called token that will get back whatever the token is. And we don't even have any tokens yet, so we're really just kind of, at this point, trying to verify that the username and the password is correct. Let's create our login async in our service. So I'm going to generate that method in the interface only. And then control click if I can, if it lets me. Come on, there it goes. Login is going to return, we'll just put a string for now, but it will return a token, and that looks good. So now I can implement that in our service. So in our service layer, I think what we want to do here is we want to have the service do the work, and we want to have our repo get the data. So essentially what I want to do is I want to try to get a user from the repo, which is the database. And if I get one, check the password. If the password is good, then get a token. And that's pretty much what I want to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the email and we're going to get the user based on just the email. Then we'll check to see if the password matches, because I can't ask the database to go out and get me a login, get me the user for this email and password, because I only have the clear text password right now. And in the database, I only have the encrypted password. So I can't find the password because I never stored it that way. So I can just retrieve what they're telling me is the correct user by email, and then I can encrypt the password and let crypto tell me whether or not that is a valid password. And if it is, then it's okay to get the token. If not, then I just, don't let it go. Let's do this first part and get the user from the repo. And so we'll have a var user is equal to a user's repository dot, we'll call it get user by email async. And we'll pass in the login dot email. And so let's make this an async method and await this call. And so now we need to create this. So I'm going to generate the interface, and it will return a task of some type of user, not user login. That's just an email and a password. So here's where our domain models come in. And so we're going to have to create a model. So I'm going to create, in models, I'm going to add another folder. And I'm going to call that domain. And in there, we'll call this user. We may or may not leave it as user, because this user has a specific use case where we're just looking to see if they're a valid password. But for now, let's just call it user. And the properties of this are going to be everything we get back from the database. When we call our get user by email, whatever the user is from the database, that's what that user needs to consist of. So let me launch SQL Server while we're waiting. And let's keep going with the user repository. So let's implement that interface. And I'm just going to copy the insert here. It's going to be a little different, but it'll save us some typing. And this user, we can bring in the namespace here from our domain model. And now it doesn't like it. So why doesn't it like it? Well, first thing, that needs to be async. And the second thing, oh, I put the wrong return type, I guess, in here. No. Oh, I didn't. Okay. So I didn't bring in the namespace of user in the interface. Okay. So our SQL connection is the same. And what we need is a stored procedure to get, let me connect to my local host. What we need is a stored procedure so that we can return a user by an email. I'm going to right click and modify my user's get, which you should have. If you need to create this database, by the way, there's some videos on it in this series. And if you look in the API project under data, you'll see some, if you just run schema create and then data.sql, it should create everything you need. I'm going to use this as my shell, but I'm going to right click under programmability stored procedures under my Savage Cell database, a new stored procedure, and I'm just going to copy this other one because it's kind of close to what I need. This is going to be STP users get by email, and it's going to take in an email address. And if we look at the table for users, we can tell the size of the column of the email is a varchar 255, so this should match. So we're going to pass in an email, and this is not an alter, this is a create. That's just there because I copied it from the other one. And so we want to select all of these things from users where the email is equal to @email. I'm just going to include a select top one. And that way, if there's more than one email address that's the same, which shouldn't be allowed in this system anyway, then it'll only grab the top one based on whatever order by is there or the default ordering. So this looks good. So this could use some formatting, but I'm going to leave it for now. Functionally, it should be good. And so let's execute that. And then if we want to test it out, we can just take the name and I can put in okay, so I gave it an email and it returned all of my data. So these are the columns right here that are going to make up that user object. So I'm going to copy those and go back to my code and so all I need to send in for a parameter here is email. And the name of my stored procedure was STP users get by email. And I'll add that to the scripts so that if you want to not type that, you can just run that STP users get by email. And this becomes the email that's passed in here. So now we're just passing the email to the proc. We're not going to execute async. We actually need data back here. So we're going to change this to a query async. And we're going to assign that to a user. So what that's going to do is let's clean that up a little bit. So what that's going to do is it's going to add the email address that we're searching for to the parameters, and then it's going to run a query which is going to return results, right? We got back a row from our database. So it's going to call this stored procedure. It is a command type of stored procedure so that it knows that this is not an actual SQL query. It's a proc to run. And the parameters of the email are passed in as well. And when we get the result row back, which is this data right here, when we get that back, go ahead and deserialize that into a user object. So our user object has to be the same data shape as this data that's coming back. And that's why I copied this stuff here. And we're going to put that into our user object. So let's go to our user domain object. And we want to create a property for each of these. So user ID, and we should match the data types that are in the table because that's what's going to come back. So our user ID is an int. So and then first name, last name, email, postal code, username, active, is confirmed, created date, modified date. We are missing a password in there, and we need to return that password so that we can check. So I need to modify my proc, and we'll add password in there. And then we have to change this to an alter because we're not creating. Okay, and if we run that again now, we get our password as well. So let's make sure we don't forget that. So first name, cool. So now we've got our now we've got our user object. Hit Control D instead of Control S. So let's go back to our user repository. Now we've got our user object, and query async, if you look at what it returns, it actually returns an IE numerable of user, because query async doesn't know that only one row is going to come back. It's not looking at that top one, and if that top one wasn't there, it certainly could return more than one. I know because I'm using it that I'm only interested in that top one. So I can just say something like, var results is equal to that. And then I can say, as long as results is not equal to null, then return results. And we can use some link here, dot first or default. And we would have to add using system.link so that we can do that. And so that would return the first row or a null if there's not a row. And then if there's not anything here, then we can return null. So we're either going to get an answer back from this that we have a user or it's empty completely. So now, if we go back to our service, we have our user. And so now we have to check that password. So I can say, remember, user could be null, according to what we just wrote. If user equals null, then for now we'll return string.empty because we're returning a string here instead of a token. And then if not, we will check the password. So I can say that this user is valid if crypto.verify hashed password, and I have to give it the hashed password, which is the one from the database, which is user.password. And I'm going to compare that to the login.password that was sent to me. And so crypto will tell me yes or no. And then I can just simply say if is valid, then get a token. Down here, I'm just going to return string.empty to get rid of this error for now, but let's see if we can actually do all this, and let's check that it actually works. So I'm going to put a breakpoint when I ask for the token in the API. Let's see if we build, if I made any mistakes. Okay, that looks good so far. And let's run our UI, and we will go to /user management. And my email is going to be savagecoder@sharklasers.com. And I believe my password was password with a capital P. I don't remember my password. Exclamation, maybe? We'll find out, I guess. And we blew up. So this page cannot be found. User management login post async. So I stopped and looked at things, and I forgot one crucial thing. So if we go back into our UI controller, the problem that we're running into with those 404s is that I have two things here that are HTTP post. And in a web API, we actually put a custom route in there to tell the routing system that this is the method or the action I want to call when I go to that route in my browser or when I post to it through an HTTP mechanism. We can tell MVC which post to pick by telling it that this one has a specific action name. And so you just have to put the action name attribute, and in there, we're just going to give it the name of this method so that when it sees login post async and it's a post, it'll call this method. And what that does is it allows you to name your code methods anything you want and expose to the outside world your MVC endpoints with another name. So it's just like an added layer of flexibility. I would say most of the time you probably match those, but depends on your use case. So let's try this again. We will go to /user management. I'm just going to try password 123. For some reason, that's ringing a bell. All right, and so now we're in our UI project. Our view model has collected our email and password, and we are sending that to our service. So I'm going to step in there. We're going to call our repository, which is going to populate our API model, and we're going to send it over to our API. So I'm just going to step over that. And now we've jumped into the API project here. So we're in the controller of the API. We've passed the data from our UI in here. We're going to go through to the service layer, and we're going to call get user by email async. I'll step in there, which is going to open a connection and add a parameter and run the stored procedure. It's going to grab the first result and return that back to the caller, which is user. So we should have a fully populated user object, and we do, complete with an encrypted password. And then we are going to use the crypto library to verify that our password 123 is a match for that cryptographically hashed version. Is valid says yes, it's true. And so now we can go and get a token. And for now, we'll just return our empty string. And so we get null back from our token. We'll have to check why that's null later, but we're going to be returning a token anyway, so I'm not really concerned with that. And we're still we're sending the user back to a confirmation reminder page, which is probably not correct. We would need to go to some kind of a user home, but we don't have one of those yet. So we'll leave that for now and we'll pick that up. I think this is a really good stopping point because we have a full round trip, including a database check. We are able to collect a login from our user. We send that data over to our API layer that checks the hashed version in the database so that we know, yes, in fact, this is the correct password for this user. And we can handle a login now. So we already can verify that this user is authenticated, so we now have to generate a token that they can use to represent themselves on all the API calls they need within this project. So let's stop here, and the next episode is going to be all about how to create our JWT tokens, what things we're going to stuff into that token, and how we can use that token to secure our APIs. So I hope this was good stuff. I know it's kind of slow building this part, but it really takes a little while to get through the UI and get through the API and tie the database stuff together. I'll get all these scripts together and uploaded, and hopefully this makes sense to you. If not, you know what to do. Practice, practice, practice makes perfect. And if you find this stuff informative, please subscribe and hit the bell. And I will see you soon, and I will see you online.